Welcome the Lord's chosen. Some people walk out of hell with scars, others walk out with instructions. That's the difference people can't explain when they look at you. They're not just curious, they're unsettled. Because statistically, logically, and emotionally, you were not supposed to recover the way you did. Survival rates don't favor people who took repeated hits with no backup, no soft landing, and no pause button. Yet here you are, moving like nothing broke you, thinking clearly after chaos, rebuilding faster than the damage ever expected. That's not inspiration talk. That's an anomaly. Here's the uncomfortable fact most people won't say out loud. Trauma usually slows people down. Studies show prolonged stress rewires the brain toward caution, fatigue, and hesitation. Recovery is expected to be slow, uneven, and visibly messy. But you didn't follow the textbook. You recalibrated. While others needed time to find themselves, you redesigned yourself under pressure. That's not resilience, as people like to package it. That's adaptation at a speed that makes observers nervous. And that's why they keep watching you, like you skipped a chapter. Because you didn't just crawl out of the valley of death, you came back fluent in it. You move with a strange calm now, like someone who already knows the worst-case scenario and found out it wasn't the end. Even your laughter hits different. There's humor in you that comes from surviving things that should have humbled you permanently. The kind that says, I've already seen the final boss. This level doesn't scare me. People want the dramatic breakdown story, the long recovery montage, the visible struggle they can understand. But what unsettles them is the efficiency. The way you recovered quietly, rebuilt quickly, and didn't make a ceremony out of surviving. It feels unhuman because it didn't look painful enough for their comfort, even though it cost you more than they'll ever know. This isn't about motivation. It's about explaining the mechanics of how someone walks through destruction, absorbs it, and comes out operational. Not perfect, not untouched, just standing when the math said you shouldn't be. Number one, you didn't heal. You adapted faster than the damage could finish you. Healing is slow. It asks for time, safety, and space to breathe. You didn't have any of that. What you had was pressure, urgency, and consequences. So instead of waiting to feel whole again, you adjusted in real time. While the damage was still happening, you were already figuring out how to move around it. That's the part people miss. They think recovery always looks like rest and reflection, but yours looked like quick thinking, sharp decisions, and learning on the run. You didn't pause life to recover from it. You learned how to function inside the storm. Most people break because they wait for pain to stop before changing. You changed because the pain wasn't stopping. You learned what drained you and cut it off without ceremony. You learned what kept you standing and doubled down on it. Not because it felt good, but because it worked. That's adaptation. It's not pretty. It doesn't get applause. It just keeps you alive. You stopped asking for perfect conditions and started working with whatever was left, even when what was left wasn't much. You didn't become stronger overnight. You became faster mentally, faster at reading situations, faster at knowing when to speak and when to move, faster at letting go of things that would slow you down. The damage expected hesitation. It expected confusion. It expected you to sit in it long enough for it to finish the job. Instead, you kept adjusting your footing. Every hit taught you something. Every loss sharpened your awareness. You weren't healed, but you were learning quicker than the damage could keep up. That's why your recovery looks unnatural to people. They assume you skipped the pain. You didn't. You just didn't let it decide the pace. You moved before fear could settle in. You chose function over comfort. Over time, those small adjustments stacked up. What tried to break you ran out of leverage. You didn't wait to be okay. You became capable first. And capability, when repeated long enough, starts to look like strength. Number 2, you stopped asking why me and started asking what survives. At some point, you realized that the question why me wasn't giving you answers, only delays. It kept you circling the pain, replaying events, and waiting for logic in a situation that didn't care about fairness. Life wasn't explaining itself, and the more you demanded meaning, the more stuck you felt. So you dropped the question altogether, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't useful anymore. You traded curiosity about injustice for focus on survival, and that shift changed everything. When you started asking what survives, your thinking became sharper. You stopped wasting energy on what should have happened and started paying attention to what was still standing, what habits didn't collapse under pressure, what thoughts kept you steady instead of spiraling, what parts of you refused to quit even when everything else felt exhausted. Survival made you practical. You learned that pain doesn't require your understanding to exist, but it does respond to how you move through it. That mindset stripped things down to essentials. You weren't trying to fix your entire life at once. You were asking smaller, tougher questions. What needs to stay? What needs to go? What can I do today that doesn't make tomorrow worse? That kind of thinking isn't inspirational, but it's effective. It turns chaos into something you can manage. It gives you leverage where emotions offer none. People often confuse this shift with emotional coldness. It wasn't that you stopped feeling. You stopped letting feelings run the operation. You learned that survival favors clarity, not drama. You didn't deny the hurt. You just refused to build your identity around it. Instead of asking the world to make sense, you focused on making yourself functional within it. Over time, that question shaped you. What survives became a filter for everything. Relationships, choices, habits, even dreams. If it couldn't hold up under pressure, it didn't come with you. That's why you didn't just get through it. You came out more grounded. You didn't solve the mystery of why it happened. You solved the more important problem, how to stay standing when it did. Number 3, you learned pain has patterns, not just emotions. Pain isn't random. At first it feels like chaos, like the world is collapsing in ways you can't predict or control. Most people experience it as a storm they have to endure, hoping it passes. You didn't stay there. You started noticing the rhythm behind it, the way it flared up at the same triggers, repeated in cycles, and followed the same silent rules. Once you recognized that, pain stopped being something that merely hurt you. It became something you could study, something you could anticipate and work around. That's a level most people never reach. They feel it, they cry, they complain, they wait. You read it. It wasn't cold calculation, it was survival. You noticed how certain environments, conversations, or even thoughts made the pain spike. You learned which behaviors amplified it and which softened it, not by accident, but through observation and discipline. You weren't looking for pity or meaning. You were mapping the battlefield. That map let you move differently. You didn't avoid life. You avoided unnecessary suffering while still engaging with what had to be faced. Pain became predictable, and predictability gave you power. And then came the unexpected part. Once you understood the patterns, you started using them. You could prepare for the moments that would normally crush others. You could manipulate the rhythm to your advantage, turning emotional weight into fuel instead of drag. That doesn't mean you stopped feeling. You felt deeply, but you no longer surrendered to every surge. You responded strategically. By the time others noticed, it looked like you'd bypassed suffering. They thought you were untouchable. The truth was sharper. You were a student of your own hardship, and that education made you unrecognizable to the pain that once owned you. Pain didn't end. You just learned to walk through it with awareness, timing, and precision. That's why recovery didn't break you, because you weren't moving blindly. You were moving like someone who had already read the manual the world refused to hand out. Number 4, you accepted that nobody was coming to rescue you. The moment you realized that no one was coming wasn't heartbreaking. It was clarifying. Most people spend years waiting for someone to step in, to understand, to fix things for them. You didn't. You saw the truth, raw and unapologetic. Life doesn't owe you safety, comfort, or a second chance. That acceptance didn't make you bitter. It made you unstoppable. Once you stopped looking for external saviors, all your energy went into something far more effective, yourself. This isn't about ego or arrogance. It's about raw survival instinct. When you understand that the world isn't going to intervene, you start moving differently. You stop hesitating, stop explaining, stop hoping for validation. You make decisions quickly because the consequences won't wait. You plan for outcomes knowing you can only rely on your own capacity to execute them. Every choice becomes intentional, every step calculated, and every resource fully utilized. There's no pause for pity, no waiting for help that isn't coming. You become your own army, your own shield, your own strategist. It also changes how you see people around you. You stop expecting empathy from those who can't give it. You stop leaning on fragile support systems and start building internal resilience. That clarity cuts through a lot of wasted energy. Every relationship, every commitment, every interaction is measured by what it contributes to your survival and growth, not by what you hope it will someday offer. And here's the thing. Once you accept that nobody is coming, you notice an almost uncanny freedom. You're no longer trapped by the fear of being left behind because you've already taken the reins. You walk through challenges with a kind of quiet authority because you know your fate isn't dictated by anyone else. You've built the kind of self-reliance most people talk about but never achieve. You didn't just survive the valley of death. You walked through it armed with the knowledge that the only rescue worth counting on is the one you orchestrate yourself. Number 5, you became resourceful because comfort was never an option. Comfort is a trap. Most people fail to realize it until it's too late. It lulls you into inaction, makes you dependent, and dulls your instincts. You didn't have that luxury. Your environment forced you to improvise, to think fast, and to do with less than what should have been enough. You became resourceful not because it was trendy or admirable, but because survival left no alternative. Every obstacle became a challenge to outsmart, every setback a test to find what worked, instead of waiting for someone to hand it to you. You learned to see opportunities in scarcity. Where others saw dead ends, you spotted loopholes, overlooked tools, and hidden advantages. You stopped relying on instructions, guides, or systems. You created your own methods, your own shortcuts, and your own strategies. The harsh reality didn't just demand resilience. It demanded creativity under pressure. And that creativity wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. Being resourceful also taught you how to leverage people, circumstances, and even mistakes. You noticed patterns others missed and used them to your benefit. When the path was blocked, you didn't wait for it to open. You found another route, built a bridge, or made one yourself. Your mind became a workshop, constantly evaluating, experimenting, and executing. Comfort could never have produced that level of mental agility. The irony is that what broke most people made you unstoppable. Every scarcity, every delay, every denial of ease sharpened you. Resourcefulness became second nature, embedded in how you see the world and how you move through it. You didn't just survive with what little you had, you thrived, because thriving under pressure required thinking, acting and adapting in ways most never attempt. In the end, being forced out of comfort didn't weaken you. It gave you tools others never develop. You became someone who doesn't just endure problems. You solve them before they become permanent. You became unpredictable, efficient, and almost unshakable. Because when life stripped everything away, you discovered you could always make something work. Number 6, you stopped romanticizing strength and embraced endurance. Strength is flashy. People celebrate it, take pictures of it, and talk about it like it's a destination. You learned early that strength alone doesn't win battles. Strength can burn out, falter, and collapse under constant pressure. What actually matters is endurance, the quiet, relentless ability to keep going when nobody notices, when nobody applauds, when everything inside screams to quit. That's what carried you through the valley of death, not a sudden surge of power or a heroic moment. Endurance doesn't look impressive. It's not the dramatic punch or the cinematic comeback. It's waking up every day, moving through pain, navigating chaos, and making small, steady progress while everything around you threatens to overwhelm. It's taking hit after hit and still finding a way to function, to keep building, to keep surviving. That's far harder than anyone realizes because it requires patience, self-discipline, and a tolerance for discomfort that most people never cultivate. Embracing endurance changed the way you approached life. You stopped seeking quick fixes or temporary victories. You learned to respect the slow grind, the invisible effort that compounds over time. You realized that the people who survive storms aren't always the ones who resist the hardest. They're the ones who last the longest. They absorb blows, adjust, and keep moving, while those chasing strength collapse under expectations or exhaustion. Endurance also taught you humility. It stripped away the need to prove yourself constantly. You didn't have to show the world you were strong, because you knew survival wasn't a show. It was a process, measured in persistence, not applause. And that quiet power made you almost untouchable. People might admire strength, but they fear endurance. They sense it in the way you move, the way you handle setbacks, the way you never truly break. In the end, you didn't just survive. You became a force defined by longevity, by the ability to outlast chaos, pain, and despair. That is the kind of strength that doesn't make headlines, but shapes lives, yours first, and everyone who crosses paths with you second. Endurance became your signature, and it will carry you far beyond anything ordinary strength could ever reach. Number 7, you made decisions while emotionally exhausted and lived with them. Most people wait for clarity, for calm, for some neat emotional reset before making big moves. You didn't have that luxury. You made choices when your mind was tired, your heart was heavy, and every part of you screamed for rest. And yet somehow, those decisions carried weight. They worked. That's not luck. That's learning to trust yourself when your instincts are raw, unpolished, and running on the edge of survival. Making decisions while drained isn't about recklessness. It's about proving to yourself that your capability isn't tied to comfort or perfect timing. When you act under exhaustion, every choice becomes sharper. You learn to strip away the noise, to cut the unnecessary, to see what actually matters. Emotional fatigue doesn't make you weak. It forces you to confront reality without the luxury of denial. You don't overthink. You don't linger on what-ifs. You move. And moving becomes the difference between stagnation and progress. Every decision you made under that pressure reinforced one brutal truth. Action outweighs hesitation, even when you feel empty. Living with those decisions wasn't easy. Some of them hurt, some of them backfired, and some of them tested you in ways no calm scenario could. But instead of blaming circumstance or waiting for someone to validate your choices, you owned them. You understood that responsibility, even in exhaustion, is a form of power. You survived because you didn't need perfect conditions. You needed resolve, and you had it. The consequence of this practice is subtle but profound. You became confident in your own judgment, unshaken by storms, because you knew you could act and recover, no matter how raw you felt. Emotional exhaustion became a teacher, not an enemy. And when people look at you, they notice it. The calm decisiveness, the silent authority, the way you navigate life without waiting for permission or perfect timing. You didn't just survive tired, you thrived through it, and that is something almost no one else can claim. Number 8, you let parts of yourself die so the rest could live. Survival isn't about holding on to everything you've ever been. It's about knowing what's worth keeping and what's dragging you under. You realize that some parts of yourself, old habits, worn-out beliefs, attachments to people or situations, were no longer serving you. They were heavy, toxic, and unnecessary. So you let them go. Not slowly, not ceremoniously, but decisively. You killed off pieces of yourself so the rest could breathe, adapt, and thrive. That's the kind of transformation most people fear, because it feels like loss. But you understood that letting parts die wasn't weakness. It was evolution. Every part you released created space. Space for clarity, space for strength, space for instincts you didn't even know were there. You didn't try to polish the parts you were leaving behind. You didn't apologize to them. You simply acknowledged that holding on to them would cost you more than letting them go. That kind of self-honesty is rare. Most people cling, hoping pain, failure, or fear will soften if they just hold on long enough. You didn't hope. You acted. This process also taught you precision. You learned to recognize what is truly essential, what is replaceable, and what is poison. Decisions became sharper because you had fewer internal battles. You weren't weighed down by old grudges, unnecessary expectations, or self-sabotaging habits. The parts that survived weren't just alive, they were optimized. They could think faster, act faster, and endure longer. You became a leaner, more formidable version of yourself. People notice it. They see someone who doesn't hesitate, who doesn't flinch at pressure, who moves with purpose. They don't understand the quiet deaths that made that possible. They don't see the pieces you left behind in the ashes, because the living parts are so dominant now. You didn't just survive the valley of death. You reconstructed yourself from it. You understood that growth sometimes demands sacrifice, not of life, but of the version of yourself that can't rise to meet the future. And that choice, that ruthless clarity, is what set you apart. Number 9, you didn't become fearless. You became fear-literate. Fear is a liar. It pretends to protect you, but most of the time it only holds you back. You didn't escape it, and you didn't ignore it. You studied it. You learned its patterns, its triggers, and its tactics. You became fluent in the language of fear, able to recognize when it was a warning and when it was a trick. That knowledge changed everything. People think surviving the valley of death is about being fearless, but real survival comes from knowing fear well enough to act in spite of it. You didn't stop feeling it. You stopped obeying it blindly. Fear-literate people don't freeze or panic. They don't waste energy resisting something they can't control. Instead, they dissect it, predict it, and use it to their advantage. You understood which fears were signals and which were chains, which ones required action, and which ones needed to be ignored. That clarity gave you power where most people felt paralyzed. You moved decisively because fear became data, not a prison. This literacy also sharpened your instincts. You became able to spot danger and opportunity simultaneously, to navigate chaos with a precision that feels unnatural to others. You no longer reacted emotionally to fear. You responded strategically. That difference is subtle but profound. People see it in the way you handle crises, the way you step forward when everyone else steps back, the way you survive storms that would crush the unprepared. Being fear-literate doesn't make life easier. It doesn't remove risk or pain, but it turns you into someone almost untouchable because you aren't controlled by what others perceive as dangerous or terrifying. You've faced the worst-case scenarios enough times to know that fear is a tool, not a master. And when people watch you operate, they feel it, the calm precision, the quiet confidence, the almost unshakable energy of someone who has met fear, studied it, and decided it wouldn't run their life. That's not bravery, it's mastery. And mastery is far more compelling than simple courage. Number 10. You survived by lowering expectations, not standards. Most people confuse expectations with standards, but they are worlds apart. Expectations are fragile, emotional, and often set by circumstance or the opinions of others. Standards are internal, grounded, and unshakable. You learned to survive not by hoping life would treat you kindly, but by lowering what you demanded from the world while keeping what you demanded from yourself high. You didn't wait for perfect conditions, understanding people, or favorable timing. You acted within reality, not fantasy, and that shift saved you repeatedly. Lowering expectations meant you stopped hoping life would make sense or provide comfort. You stopped waiting for others to step up, for doors to open automatically, or for validation to arrive. You let go of the idea that the world should accommodate your pain, your ambitions, or your timing. That was liberating. Every ounce of energy you spent hoping for things to be easier was redirected toward solving the problem right in front of you. You survived because you didn't demand miracles. You demanded execution. At the same time, you didn't lower your standards. You refused to compromise on what mattered to your growth, integrity, and survival. Every action, every decision, every move had a baseline of excellence that you wouldn't allow to falter. That combination, flexible expectations and rigid standards, made you untouchable. You could navigate chaos without falling apart because you weren't bound by disappointment, but you were still bound to your own code. This approach reshaped your perspective. You started seeing obstacles not as failures, but as conditions to operate within. You became comfortable with discomfort, finding solutions where others saw only problems. People might assume survival is about enduring or resisting, but you understood that it's about playing the game on the terms life actually gives you, while holding yourself to a standard no one can take away. That's how you didn't just survive. You thrived. That distinction, quiet but profound, is what separates those who merely live from those who rise beyond their circumstances. Number 11, you used repetition when motivation was gone. Motivation is a fleeting thing. It shows up, it inspires, and then it disappears, leaving most people stranded in half-started plans and unfinished dreams. You discovered early that waiting for motivation was a trap. If survival depended on feeling inspired, you would have failed. Instead, you relied on repetition. You created habits, systems, and routines that didn't require emotional fuel. You moved, even when your energy was gone, even when your mind screamed to quit. That's where real transformation begins, when action continues without applause, without excitement, without a spark. Repetition is simple in theory, but brutal in practice. It's mundane, exhausting, and unglamorous, but it beats waiting for lightning to strike. You did the work over and over, not because it felt good, but because it worked. Every repeated effort, every small, seemingly insignificant action compounded. It built a momentum invisible to the casual observer. You weren't chasing big victories. You were stacking small, unstoppable ones. That's why when people look at your recovery, it feels unexplainable. They don't see the countless invisible repetitions that carried you through the valley of death. Using repetition when motivation is gone also trained your discipline. You became someone who doesn't rely on feelings to function. You became predictable in your consistency, unshakable in your progress, and patient with the grind. Motivation might ignite action, but repetition sustains it. It's the quiet force that turns survival into mastery, struggle into skill, and chaos into control. This approach reshaped your relationship with yourself. You learned that waiting for inspiration is optional. What matters is what you do consistently, especially when doing it feels impossible. You weren't superhuman. You were methodical. You didn't wait to feel ready. You prepared yourself through action, one repetition at a time. And over time, those repeated steps added up to results that looked miraculous to everyone else. But to you, they were simply the product of relentless, disciplined movement when others would have stopped. That's why repetition became your secret weapon, and why it transformed exhaustion into unstoppable progress. Number 12. You learned that recovery isn't linear, it's layered. Most people imagine recovery as a straight path, a steady climb from darkness to light. That's not how it works, and you learned that the hard way. Recovery is messy. It comes in layers, overlapping, twisting, and sometimes retreating before moving forward again. Every time you thought you had escaped one part of the pain, another layer revealed itself, often more stubborn, sharper, and more complex than the first. Instead of getting frustrated, you learn to navigate it. You realize that healing doesn't demand perfection. It demands patience, awareness, and the willingness to keep rebuilding, even when progress feels invisible. Each layer you faced required a different skill, a different kind of resilience. Emotional wounds had to be tolerated while physical, financial, or relational pressures demanded action. You couldn't treat everything at once. You prioritized, adapted, and returned to challenges in cycles, peeling one layer at a time. That's why your recovery looks effortless to others. It wasn't, it was strategic. You learned to handle complexity without panic, to endure contradictions, and to embrace the reality that one setback didn't erase the progress you had already made. Understanding recovery as layered also changed your perspective on mistakes and setbacks. You stopped expecting yourself to be fully healed in a single sweep. Every stumble was just another layer revealing what needed attention, another opportunity to build depth. That mindset gave you patience without passivity, action without recklessness, and focus without rigidity. You became someone who could operate under pressure while still attending to the subtler, slower aspects of growth. By the time people notice you thriving, they assume you've always been strong. The truth is far more impressive. You didn't just push through, you learned the architecture of survival. You understood that pain, loss, and struggle accumulate like layers, and you became skilled at navigating them without losing your footing. That mastery of layered recovery made you not just resilient, but almost unshakable. A person who doesn't just survive the valley of death, but emerges layered, fortified, and untouchable in ways few ever comprehend. Number 13. You stopped explaining your pain to people who benefited from your silence. For a long time, you probably tried to make others understand what you were going through. You broke yourself down, layer by layer, hoping someone would notice, empathize, or step in. Most of the time, that effort was wasted. Some people weren't there to help. They were there to watch, judge, or even benefit from your struggle. Eventually, you realized that explaining your pain didn't heal you. It just gave others a front-row seat to it. So you stopped. You stopped narrating your suffering, stopped seeking validation from those who had no intention of offering it, and stopped giving away pieces of yourself that didn't need to be seen. That choice wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Silence became your shield. You learned that there's a power in holding your story close, in letting your actions, not explanations, communicate what you've endured. People start noticing differently when you don't plead for understanding. Your presence, your calm, your progress, all of it speaks louder than any words could. And those who truly matter will feel it without a play-by-play. Those who don't, they weren't worth your energy anyway. With this shift, you gained focus. You could put energy into building yourself rather than justifying yourself. You didn't waste time convincing bystanders or wrestling with judgment. Instead, you channeled your pain into strategy, endurance, and adaptation. You became a person whose results carried the weight of their struggles without having to spell it out for anyone. This discipline also changed the way you interacted with the world. You learned to recognize who deserved your trust and who didn't. You kept your experiences private, but you didn't hide your growth. You didn't need to explain your scars. You let your life tell the story. And that made you unshakable. People notice a person who thrives quietly. They respect someone who suffers, learns, and acts without seeking permission or sympathy. By stopping explanations, you reclaimed control over your narrative, and that control made you stronger, sharper, and almost untouchable. Number 14. You came back different because death brushed you and missed. When most people face life-threatening moments, they emerge shaken, fragile, and cautious. You came back changed in a way that isn't soft, isn't tentative, and isn't easily understood. Death brushed against you, close enough to leave marks, close enough to teach lessons that nobody else could comprehend. And yet it didn't take you. That near brush transformed you from someone who simply survived into someone who moves through the world with a quiet, almost unspoken authority. People can feel it before they understand it. They notice the intensity in your calm, the precision in your decisions, the weight behind your presence. The difference isn't physical, it's almost impossible to describe. You carry a deep-rooted understanding that life is finite, fragile, and unpredictable, that awareness sharpens instincts, amplifies intuition, and rewires priorities. Trivial fears and distractions lose their grip. You no longer waste energy on what doesn't matter. You respond faster, act smarter, and endure longer because you've already stared at the edge and realized you weren't done yet. Every choice, every action, every interaction now carries the echo of that brush with the impossible. Coming back different also means you are no longer tethered to old versions of yourself. The version that hesitated, doubted, or waited for permission has been replaced. You rebuilt from the ashes with clarity, strategy, and a fierce understanding of your own limits and your own power. People can't replicate this transformation because it isn't just experience. It's an intimacy with life and death that changes the core of who you are. That brush with death gave you more than survival. It gave you presence, authority, and a perspective that most will never attain. You didn't just continue, you leveled up, and the result is striking. You're someone who walks through challenges with the confidence of someone who has already crossed the line others fear to approach. That's why people stare, why they ask how you did it, why your recovery feels almost unhuman. You came back different because you faced the impossible, and it failed to claim you. You carry that victory quietly, powerfully, and unmistakably in every move you make. You didn't just survive the valley of death, you transformed it into a proving ground. Every hit, every loss, every sleepless night became a lesson, a tool, a stepping stone. You adapted faster than the damage could finish you, studied pain until it lost its power, and acted decisively when others would have frozen. You let go of what no longer served you, mastered fear, and turned repetition, endurance, and discipline into invisible weapons. You lowered expectations without lowering standards, held your silence as armor, and emerged from every trial with a clarity and strength that defies ordinary understanding. You became someone who doesn't just face challenges, you walks through them with authority, precision, and an unshakable presence. People notice it, they feel it, and the truth is, what you've built is rare, almost unexplainable, and undeniably powerful. Your journey isn't a story of luck or timing. It's the outcome of relentless, often unseen effort. It's the evidence of someone who refused to surrender, who learned from every layer of struggle, who became fear-literate, self-reliant, and strategically unbreakable. This is why your recovery looks unhuman to others. It isn't just survival, it's mastery of yourself and your circumstances, a quiet power forged in moments most people would crumble under. If this resonated with you and you want to uncover more truths like these, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if it moved you, comment your thoughts below so we can connect, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every story of strength deserves to be seen, and your journey is no exception. Stay blessed always.